the Weekly Show with David J. Maloney.
This week, David chats with legendary actor Hank Garrett.
And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the Weekly Show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got a really special guest. His career saw him face off in fights with some of Hollywood's greatest leading men and in some of the most iconic films and shows of his generation. Spanning the genres from Car 54, Where Are You?, to Three Doors of the Condor, Serpico, and the Emmy-nominated TV show Paris, he has done it all. Here to chat about his incredible life and career is none other than actor Hank Garrett. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our featured guest tonight has had a storied career in television as well as film and across the genre spectrum in a way that saw him face off with some of Hollywood's greatest leading men and deliver the goods in many iconic stories. From Car 54, Where Are You?, to the Emmy-nominated show Paris with James Earl Jones, to 3 Days of the Condor with Robert Redford, and Serpico with Al Pacino, he's done it all. Here to chat about his incredible life and career is none other than actor Hank Garrett. Hank, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I didn't realize I did all that stuff.
Yeah, as we get older, we start to forget all the things, right? So, as I recall, you grew up in Harlem. What was it like growing up there when you were a kid?
Oh my God, I lived on the street. Absolutely, slept in cardboard boxes. Myself and another a friend of mine named George Washington Jr., if he doesn't mind my using his name. The two of us were hoodlums on the street. We kind of like fended for food. It was tough. It was quite tough, but it didn't seem like tough at the time because we all lived that way.
You didn't know any better, right?
Exactly.
Do you think your early life in Harlem prepared you in any way or perhaps set the stage for the career you'd eventually go on to have?
When I tried to do some acting, or when somebody introduced me to a casting guy, and they were looking for toughs for a movie, and it kind of went from there. I okayed it, and I was in this film with a bunch of other bad guys. And the director said, "Where do I know you from?" And I said, "No, I'm from the street." He said, "I'd like to talk to you about, would you like to be interested in studying acting?" I said, "What are you, crazy? What is it going to pay?" And it started that way.
How did you get into fighting, wrestling, and weightlifting in the beginning? Was that out of pleasure or necessity?
Started weightlifting. A friend of mine had a set of weights, and we would train on the roof. We worked out, and I met a gentleman who was a pro wrestler. His name was Judo Gene LaBelle. He turned out to be world champ judo jiu-jitsu. And he got me interested in speaking to a couple of people about possibly being in a movie or a series. And that's how it kind of started. At one time, living on the street, I got my nose busted when I was 9. And I didn't know how much about defending myself. And I met a gentleman who was into martial arts. And I became a student. And so I was studying things like Taekwondo, Hapkido, Sansu, Judo, Jiu-Jitsu. And I became quite good at it. Gene LaBelle got me into pro wrestling. And I became Hank Daniels, the Minnesota farm boy. Never saw Minnesota, never saw a farm in my life. But here I was on television, wrestling. I was a pro wrestler and quite good. met a bunch of other pro wrestlers, and they said, have you ever thought about getting on television or in the movies? And I went, are you kidding me? Wound up meeting some people that were involved, a couple of directors. Next thing I know, I'm doing a television series. And it went from there. Suddenly, I'm one of the stars of a show called Car 54, Where Are You? And as it happens, I'm the only one left from that series.
Wow. Is it true Sammy Davis Jr. had some part to play in your finding work and staying out of trouble?
Yes.
What's the story there?
I had a chance to get up to a theater in New York, and I had a shot of doing my act because I started talking about the neighborhood. And here I am working the Apollo Theater in Harlem, talking
about crowd.
Yes, an amazing group. Someone told about Sammy Davis Jr., about this guy, me. Sammy Davis came backstage, and I was sitting there in awe. I knew who he was. This a big star. And we became friends. And I went to his home. I was invited to his home. And one of the things that I had to do for him, it was a Puerto Rican airline pilot. So it's, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your flight commander welcoming you to flight 602, which also happens to be the number for today. People played the numbers in the area, and I wound up appearing at the Apollo, doing what I do and doing the Puerto Rican airline pilot because I was raised by a Puerto Rican family. So it was, wow, it was amazing. I could not believe what was happening. Here I am, this street hoodlum who's appearing at the Apollo Theater. Well, and it went from there.
Was it any surprise at all to your parents when you told them you were going to start performing comedy? And what really made you decide to give it a go? Was it out of necessity, or?
I had kind of a strange way of looking at things. I would find things very funny. I turned tragedy into comedy for myself. It's the only way to survive. And I became a big hit in the neighborhood because I talked about everyday things, playing stickball, stealing from the local candy store. And they came to see me, and I was out of my mind. I couldn't believe. And I was getting paid to do that. I did that on the streets, the comedy, mostly to save myself from a beating. Another gang would come into my neighborhood, and they grabbed me immediately because I was one of the bigger guys there. And I started telling jokes. And it saved me from a terrible beating. I said, oh, wow, comedy pays off. So that's how it all started for me.
It's kind of incredible to see how your career combined two almost polar opposite arenas, comedy and drama, comedian and wrestler. I mean, I'm sitting there going, geez, what do I make of those combinations? When did you decide to start auditioning to be an actor? What was the impetus there?
When I was also a cop for a very short moment. I became a cop because I couldn't stand what was happening to people in the neighborhood. If a cop came through, he didn't do anything other than, stay in the car and leave. Yeah, okay, sure. So you got robbed. Oh, yeah, well, all right, okay, give me a name and address. And of course, when they left, the cop tore up the information. And I thought, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to become a cop. I'm going to make a difference. I became a cop, and hoping to be sent to my old neighborhood, I did momentarily. And next thing, because I was a comic, I was doing shows for the police department. And I wasn't doing anything to help anybody on the street. So I left the police force and became a comedian. I wound up being Tony Bennett's opening act for 4 years. And so it went from there.
And that kind of segues into Car 54. Where are you? What's the story there?
I went to see, someone recommended me. I went in to meet the casting director, and he called the director over, and he said, he's a guy who was a cop. Very briefly, he said, let me talk to him. He spoke to me and he said, well, what are you doing right now? I said, well, I'm working clubs as a comic. And he said, you have experience as a cop? I said, well, very, very short. And he said, how would you like to do a series called Car 54, Where Are You? It's a series about cops, or the worst cops you can possibly imagine. It's a comedy. Would you be interested? I said, doing what? He said, become one of the comedy cops. And I went, am I getting paid for that? And he said, yes. And that's how it happened. We shot in the Bronx, so I didn't have too far to travel. By subway, boom, going up to the studio. And suddenly we were the hit on television. One of the top shows was Car 54, Where Are You? And here I was with this hit show, still living in Harlem. And wow, I could move out now. And that's how it happened. It happened that quickly. It were years before it happened, but for me, my God, it was just amazing going to meeting all these amazing people. Fred Gwynn, Joey Ross, guys with all this amazing experience. Al Lewis, who played my partner on the show. I was in awe, learning as I went along. And because of Car 54, I started taking acting lessons. And someone said, don't. No, stay as you are. It's what's keeping you going right now.
They don't fix something that isn't broken.
It's yes, and that I had taken a couple of acting lessons, and it was okay, but it did nothing to help the characters I was playing. But I learned some stuff, and wound up doing guest appearances on different shows, mostly playing tough guys, which I assure you I'm not. Kept working out. I started working out to protect myself. I studied martial arts. I became very proficient. I have several ranks in different art forms. And it was made Hank Garrett what he is today because of studying with the different people, some of the most amazing people I'd ever met in my life. This Gene LaBelle, who became world champ, beating people all over the world in martial arts and pro wrestling. And he was my teacher, my sensei.
Now, I believe you called Car 54 the best comedy of its time. What makes you say that?
It showed the police in a different light. Very human, some too human, to the point of being called stupid, and working with some of the best actors. Paul Reed, who played the captain, who had done so many Broadway shows, he took me under his wing. He said, listen, when you do this, do this, and then instead of looking into the camera, don't look directly into the camera at all. Above, below, to the side. And having worked with these amazing people, wow.
Joe Ross, Fred Gwynn, you mentioned earlier.
See, Joey Ross was a comic. The captain, Paul Reed, did so many Broadway shows, great singing voice, and I watched him all the time, and I learned just by watching. So, and here I am, the last survivor of Car 54. And I do autograph shows around the country, and we have a book out now.
Yeah, tell me about the book.
Oh, it's all about my life, all the experiences, the comedy experiences. And now Netflix has the book, and we're hoping they either turn it into a movie or a series. So a dear friend of mine, submitted the book, and he said if they didn't like it, you would have had that book back it to you in a few days. But they've got it for several weeks now. So possibly, who knows? But we pray.
Well, I'm sure it'll be picked up wherever fine books are sold. You went on later to land the role of Malone in Serpico, one of the all-time great films of that genre. How did that role come about for you?
When I was interviewed, and they said, what is your background? And I told them, I said, I lived on the street. I was a street hoodlum. They said, what? I said, yeah. They said, where? I said, in Harlem. You lived in Harlem? I said, yeah. Where? On 111th between Park and Lexington. And who did you hang out with? I said, with some of the toughest people you'll ever want to meet. Did you become a tough guy yourself? I said, not tried to be tough, but compared to these guys, a lot of the people wound up going to prison, wound up becoming a cop instead. And they referred to me as the hoodlum cop. They said, Hank, do you know anything about the streets you were on? I said, yes, I know all the stuff about the street. And when they asked me, you think you can talk about, I said, only certain things. A lot of stuff I will not discuss. And that was my experience on the street, being a bad guy. I had a pistol in my pocket when I was 12 years old. Sammy Davis Jr. Came to see me, took me to the Apollo Theater. First, I was taken to him. There was a gentleman who was my mother's customer, he used to buy fruits and vegetables from my mother. And my mother's crying to him about the fact that I was always on the street and in trouble. He came to see me. And he said, the first thing he did, he said, and he slapped a cigarette out of my mouth. And I was going to throw a punch at him. Who are you? And his bodyguards stepped forward, and I went, okay, all right, okay. He said, I'm taking you out tonight. So I thought, he says, your mother wants me to take you out. You tell somebody in Harlem I'm taking you out, it means that I'm going to knock you off.
You think you're not coming back?
Yes, and I said, my mother put a hit on me. He said, no, stupid, I'm taking you out. I'm taking you to the Apollo Theater. Went to see Sammy Davis Jr. at the Apollo Theater. Next thing I know, they set up an appointment for me to see Sam away from the theater. And I went to see Sammy, and he said, sit down, man. I said, yeah. He said, you're a tough guy, right? I said, yeah, I'm a tough guy. He said, tough guys wind up with broken bones and scars. You're beyond that. You're going to get killed. You're going to die. I said, what? He said, yeah. The way you're going? Yeah. And here I am, I'm 12 years old at the time, and I've got a gun in my pocket, a .25 caliber pistol. And that pistol started to get very heavy. I thought it was going to rip through my pocket, because as he kept talking to me, and he said, I got a job for you. It's going to be a gig, a job. Not running numbers, not doing anything illegal. And he got me a job. And I was working at the Apollo Theater. And next thing I know, because of Sam, I was appearing at the Apollo Theater. People said, Hank, you're working at the theater? I said, I'm appearing there, man. And that's how it opened up for me. I did well. Next thing I know, I'm working clubs around the neighborhood in the Bronx and Staten Island and Brooklyn. Oh, wow. And then Call 54 came along. And we did that in the Bronx. And suddenly, people are saying, hey, Nicholson! That was the character I played on Call 54. People recognizing Nicholson. Wow. And so many things started happening. Wow. And, I'm going to start tearing up anyway now.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to actor Hank Garrett for joining us. Hank's going to be back again next week to finish our interview, so please tune back in. Stay safe, everyone.